History rarely announces its turning points with a single explosion. More often, it tightens slowly, through meetings held behind closed doors, through polite smiles masking fear, through decisions that seem technical at the time but reshape entire continents. In moments of crisis, power reveals itself not through speeches but through silence, through who waits, who decides, and who pays. One such moment arrived in Europe at the dawn of the last decade, when the future of an entire union hinged on a single question no leader wanted to answer out loud. The year was 2010, and Europe felt as though it was tearing itself apart from the inside. In the corridors of authority in Brussels and Frankfurt, the atmosphere was suffocating. Panic hung in the air. Newspapers warned of the collapse of the European experiment itself. Greece was in flames, its finances exposed as hollow, corroded by years of debt and denial. Spain watched its real estate miracle dissolve into rubble, dragging its banks down with it. Italy, vast, industrial, and exhausted, struggled just to breathe under the weight of its obligations. The financial markets, cold and unforgiving, had turned their attention toward the Eurozone, and they sensed weakness. But amid the spreading panic, attention fixed itself on one city alone. Not Paris, not London, not Brussels. Berlin. A single question echoed across trading floors and government offices alike. Would Germany pay? Would German taxpayers agree to shoulder the cost of saving the euro? At that moment, Germany stood as Europe's unquestioned center of gravity. It was the engine, the vault, the paymaster. Its chancellor, Angela Merkel, had become the continent's de facto leader, capable of rescuing nations or condemning them with a single decision. Yet if you widened the lens and looked west, another great power stood watching this crisis unfold, powerless and uneasy. That nation was France. For centuries, France had seen itself as Europe's diplomatic mind, its intellectual architect, the essential counterweight to raw power. It believed, almost instinctively, that it should be leading the response. Instead, Paris found itself frozen. French leaders discovered, to their quiet horror, that they could not openly oppose German demands. They stood beside Merkel for the cameras, nodded through austerity policies they despised, and swallowed their objections to keep markets calm and the European project afloat. France had become a junior partner, no longer steering, merely riding along in a vehicle driven from Berlin. The cruelest irony of all was this: France's weakness was not imposed by German aggression. It was the consequence of a trap France itself had designed decades earlier, a golden cage meant to restrain German power forever. That cage was the euro. In a twist worthy of tragedy, France had built it, locked Germany inside, and then discovered it had locked itself in as well, only to realize the creature beside it was far stronger. To understand how a nation as experienced and strategically minded as France made such a catastrophic misjudgment, we cannot stay in 2010. We must go back to a cold, electric night that reshaped Europe forever, November 9, 1989. For much of the world, the fall of the Berlin Wall was pure euphoria. Young people climbed the concrete barrier, hammers swinging, families embraced. The Iron Curtain cracked and collapsed. Television anchors declared the Cold War over. History itself finished. But in Paris and London, celebration gave way to dread. President François Mitterrand sat in the Élysée Palace, staring into the abyss. A man shaped by war, captivity, and the brutal rhythms of European history, Mitterrand did not see liberation in Berlin's crowds. He saw the return of France's oldest nightmare, a unified Germany. For more than a century, French foreign policy had revolved around one imperative: keep Germany weak or keep it divided. A united Germany at the heart of Europe, larger in population and vastly stronger industrially, was an existential threat. Diplomatic cables from that winter reveal panic carefully hidden from the public. Mitterrand was not uneasy. He was desperate. Across the Channel, Margaret Thatcher shared his fear. Ideological opposites in nearly every respect, the British Prime Minister and the French President were united on Germany. In private, Mitterrand warned Thatcher that a unified Germany could wield more influence than Hitler ever had, not through armies, but through sheer economic gravity. Thatcher agreed. She famously remarked that the Germans had been defeated twice and were now back again. Her anxiety ran so deep that she reportedly carried a 1937 map of Europe in her handbag, pointing to old German territories and warning colleagues what might come next. The fear was so intense that France even considered the unthinkable, appealing to the Soviet Union. Mitterrand traveled to Kiev to meet Mikhail Gorbachev, urging him to slow or block reunification, even suggesting the Red Army remain in East Germany if necessary. It was a last frantic attempt to freeze history in place. But history does not freeze. The German people demanded unity. The United States supported it. And the Soviet Union was too exhausted, too bankrupt to resist. By early 1990, Mitterrand understood the truth. Germany would reunify. The old strategy was dead. France needed a new one. If Germany could not be stopped from becoming a giant, it would have to be bound. Mitterrand and his advisors devised a daring plan. France would demand the heart of German power itself, the Deutsche Mark. To Germans, the mark was sacred. It symbolized post-war rebirth, discipline, stability. It was more than money, it was identity, and it dominated Europe. Throughout the 1980s, the Bundesbank effectively dictated continental monetary policy. If Germany raised interest rates, everyone followed, or paid the price. Mitterrand had learned this lesson painfully. Elected in 1981 on a socialist platform, he tried to spend his way to prosperity. Markets fled, capital poured into Germany. The Bundesbank refused to bend. By 1983, Mitterrand was forced into humiliating retreat, abandoning his program and imposing austerity. He never forgot. As long as the Deutsche Mark existed, France would never be sovereign. Thus, the logic of the euro was born, not as an economic dream, but as a geopolitical weapon. A single currency would dissolve the mark, dilute German power, and shift decisions to a European central bank where France would have a seat. At a summit in Strasbourg, Mitterrand played his hand. France's approval of reunification would come at a price. Germany would commit to monetary union. Chancellor Helmut Kohl faced an impossible choice. The German people adored the mark, but reunification was his life's mission. History had him cornered. Public opinion in Germany was clear at the time. Nearly 70% of Germans opposed the euro. They trusted the Deutsche Mark. It was familiar, solid, earned through decades of discipline. What they did not trust was a vague new currency shared with countries they viewed as fiscally reckless: Italy, Greece, Spain. To many Germans, the euro felt like a gamble with their hard-won stability. But Helmut Kohl was not merely a custodian of public sentiment. He was a statesman shaped by history, and he understood one harsh reality. German reunification could not happen against the combined resistance of France and Britain. He needed François Mitterrand's consent. Without it, unity would come at an unbearable diplomatic cost. So Kohl made a decision that would echo across generations. He said yes. He placed the Deutsche Mark, the most powerful symbol of post-war German identity, on the altar of reunification. He overruled his own economists. He defied the will of his voters. He sacrificed the currency Germans loved in exchange for the nation they had dreamed of for 4 decades. But here lies the detail France failed to grasp. Kohl did not surrender. He negotiated. Germany would accept the euro, but only on German terms. If Europe was to share a currency, then that currency would be governed by German monetary philosophy. The future European Central Bank would not resemble a French political institution. It would be a replica of the Bundesbank, independent, untouchable by politicians, forbidden from financing government deficits, obsessed with one goal alone: price stability. To underline the point, Kohl demanded that the ECB's headquarters be placed not in Paris, not in Brussels, but in Frankfurt, within walking distance of the old Bundesbank itself. Then came the rules. Germany insisted on strict entry conditions: deficits capped at 3% of GDP, public debt limited to 60%. These numbers were, in truth, arbitrary. The famous 3% threshold was hastily invented by a French civil servant who thought it sounded sensible. But Germany treated these limits not as guidelines, but as sacred law. The purpose was simple: to prevent Southern European governments from using the euro as a license to spend. France agreed. Why? Because France believed rules were flexible. Paper constraints. The French political class assumed that when reality collided with regulation, politics would prevail. They believed Germany would write the rules, but France would steer the process. Once the euro existed, they assumed political pressure would force compromise. This assumption would prove disastrous. When the euro launched in 1999, the consequences were not immediate. In fact, the early years seemed to confirm French confidence. Germany struggled. The cost of reunification was crushing. The eastern regions drained public finances. Unemployment soared. Growth stagnated. Germany was mockingly labeled the sick man of Europe. France, by contrast, was doing reasonably well. In Paris, the elite congratulated themselves. The giant had been chained, and it was faltering. But Germany responded the only way it knows how. It restructured. In 2003, Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder introduced Agenda 2010, a set of brutal labor and welfare reforms that detonated his own political career. Unemployment benefits were slashed. Workers were pushed into any job available. Labor markets were loosened. Union power weakened. Wage growth was deliberately suppressed. For a decade, German workers endured stagnation. Longer hours, less security, same pay. It was economic pain by design. France chose the opposite path. The 35-hour workweek was introduced. Wages continued rising. Public spending expanded. Protected by the euro, Paris felt no urgency to reform. And this was the moment the trap began to close. Before the euro, France had an escape valve. If costs rose and competitiveness fell, the solution was devaluation. The franc would weaken, exports would recover, balance restored. With the euro, that valve was sealed shut. France and Germany now shared the same exchange rate, but lived in different economic realities. German costs fell, French costs rose. By 2008, French labor costs had climbed nearly 30%. Germany's barely moved. The euro magnified this divergence. For Germany, the euro was too weak. Had the Deutsche Mark still existed, Germany's export success would have driven it sky high, slowing sales abroad. Instead, the euro was weighed down by weaker economies. Germany enjoyed a permanently undervalued currency, a silent subsidy for its exporters. BMW, Siemens, BASF. They conquered global markets. For France, the euro was too strong. It functioned like a tax on exports. French companies couldn't lower prices. They couldn't devalue. They simply lost. Factories closed. Market share eroded. Trade deficits ballooned. Between 2000 and 2010, French exports collapsed while Germany's surged. Nearly 1 million industrial jobs vanished. Manufacturing shrank from 16% of GDP to barely 10%. Germany accumulated vast surpluses and recycled them as loans to the rest of Europe, fueling debt bubbles in Greece and Spain that would later explode. By 2010, the trap was fully visible. France had lost economic sovereignty. Germany held it. When crisis meetings convened, Paris had no leverage. Weak growth, high deficits, no control over currency. Germany arrived with cash, credibility, and confidence. The so-called Franco-German motor was exposed as fiction. There was only one driver. Angela Merkel and Wolfgang Schäuble set the terms. Nicolas Sarkozy shuttled desperately between capitals, pleading for solidarity, returning to cameras claiming unity while markets saw submission. The Deauville summit of October 2010 sealed it. France wanted bailouts. Germany agreed. On condition of punishment, private investors would take losses. Austerity would be enforced. Sarkozy accepted. It was surrender. The euro had not created political Europe. It had created economic hierarchy. France had feared German tanks. It should have feared German accounting. The unrest that followed, industrial decay, stagnation, the yellow vest protests, was the echo of that miscalculation. A political dream placed above economic reality. France built the trap. France baited the trap, and France walked into it. The doors are closed now. The key rests in Berlin. And history, as always, has chosen efficiency over intention.